IKN 98,3 FM dan aplikasi RRI Digital.
Welcome listener to RRI IKN, yes, your English service on 98.3 FM RRI IKN. On the line, we already connected with Director of United Nations Information Center in Jakarta, Indonesia, Excellency Miklos Gaspar. Good morning, Pak Miklos.
Selamat pagi IKN, selamat pagi Indonesia.
Selamat pagi Jakarta, salam Nusantara.
Salam.
Right, so catching up, thank you so much again for your time, sparing your valuable time with RRI IKN right here on East Kalimantan. Previously, we already talked of the UN supports in Indonesia and how Indonesia supports the UN in part 1 last week, but just a little bit recap on what we were talking about on our part 1. Can you explain kindly again to our listener and viewer out there?
Yes, no problem. So the UN has a presence in Indonesia. We have offices in several cities with about 2,000 staff, but most of them are Indonesian. So more than 90% of the UN staff are Indonesian, and they work running various development projects. These are development projects that are being conducted in cooperation with various government ministries. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Bappenas are our main counterparts. And then my colleagues who work for 26 various different UN agencies design and implement projects in cooperation with different line ministries, really all over the country, but with a focus on, the poorer regions and the more vulnerable people of Indonesia. So that's the main way in which we here support the development of Indonesia, in supporting the government towards its development goals in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and of course support the people of Indonesia.
Right, 26 agencies of UN working together side by side with Indonesian government, covering from the very western part of Indonesia to the eastern part of Indonesia. Correct.
Yes, that is correct. So we have a stronger presence in the eastern part because that's where there's more need for this kind of support.
Right, let's go over these eastern parts of Indonesia, starting like from NTT, NTB, and until Papua, or?
Sure. I mean, it's it is really all over Indonesia, but I can give you examples. I can give you examples from NTT. I can give you examples from Kalimantan. So I mean, you mentioned NTT. So one project that is actually active in NTT, Maluku, and also various parts of Papua is by the IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agriculture Development, in cooperation with the Ministry of Villages. And what they do is they help villages, small communities, basically create business plans, identify ways that could make them more competitive, that they could move from subsistence agriculture to be selling products in the market. There was one of these villages that I had the opportunity to visit on Flores Island, and there I had really seen the impact of this work, that villages who were really practicing subsistence agriculture before, so they only had the food that they grew, are now selling candle nut to traders, and they also have a little factory to get the oil out of the candle nut, which is used as cosmetics raw material, and this has clearly lifted their quality of life and income. So that's an example. You asked for NTT. That's an example in NTT.
Okay, so is it? Sorry to cut you off, but you said.
What I want to. Go ahead.
Okay. Right. You mentioned earlier International Fund for Agriculture Development, IFAD.
Yes.
Is it only like in Flores Island, but also like in the major islands, let's say NTT, NTB, and also Papua?
No, so this particular project is on various islands. I mean, Flores, which is on NTT.
Yes.
Right. They also work in Maluku and work on various parts of Papua with this particular project. Yes. Now, IFAD, and other agencies have other projects that are on other islands, including Java. So it's really, as you said, the UN works, all over Indonesia. I could give you an example from Kalimantan, if you're interested, perhaps.
Please do.
To your listeners.
Yes.
So there is a project by the World Food Programme together with the Indonesian, National Food Agency.
Okay.
Which is what they've done is they have created what's called a food insecurity vulnerability atlas. Now that's a complex term, but what it means is to be able to, using data, to be able to predict which village and which area of cities are most vulnerable to food insecurity, meaning that people don't have a nutritious diet. And what was done, this is a project in West Kalimantan, for instance, actually the project is all over the country, but in West Kalimantan,
it is concentrated in West Kalimantan then?
No. So the project is national. The entire country is mapped out.
Oh, okay.
But in two places, West Kalimantan and Kupang, so again in NTT,
yes,
the local government, in one case the chip, and in the other cases the city chip, have taken Food Atlas and said that development assistance needs to be targeted to villages and neighborhoods that have been deemed food insecure based on the scientific methods. This is important because often we think, you and I together on the street, maybe we think, oh, poor people, let's give them rice. But, we could be that with the best intentions, we get it wrong. And maybe if they are poor, it's not rice they need, but something else. This is why data is so important. Data-based policy making, development assistance is the most vulnerable. And again, a village that I visit in West Kalimantan, as a result, what they did, for instance, they fixed the road that goes to this village so that they could to market more easily. They hooked up to water, a hole that didn't have it. They had courses for mostly women on how to grow vegetables and gave them seeds. And none of the implemented by. Indonesia is a middle-income country, has a very competent own public service. What the UN did is to work with the food agency on the vulnerability atlas. Then after that, in this case, the local governments that took on that data and did development projects based on this data.
Okay, Nicholas, I need to remind you that earlier your voice is kind of like a breaking up, so just to inform you the situation, the thing that you were like convey, it was kind of like but it's fine though. Right, so you said earlier that you have been, your part, the UN have mapped out all the entire area in Indonesia, which most vulnerable, you said earlier that it is located on West Kalimantan and NTT. Did I get it right?
So perhaps that's where there are areas, communities vulnerable to food insecurity in many places in Indonesia. Okay. What was special about West Kalimantan is that they took this study. It was the government actually in Sanggau Kabupaten.
Okay.
That they took this study and used this study to determine which of their, I think, 160 villages are food insecure.
Right.
And they found that 4 were food or at risk of food insecurity. And then they concentrated development efforts on these 4 villages. So it's not at all that West Kalimantan would be more at risk of food insecurity in other parts of the country. It's there that the local authorities said, okay, we need to become more science-based in the way we carry out our own development projects.
Yeah. So based on the findings, it's like, are there like a lack of technology or lack of willingness? What do you say? What do you think?
What do you mean?
It's like the thing that, as we know, Indonesia is one of the country that produce so many rice paddies. So in terms of food scarcity, it's kind of like hard to accept until nowadays.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So no, people don't starve in Indonesia. I mean, it's a tropical country. You walk on the street, you find food.
Yes.
But they may not have a nutritious diet. They may not have a balanced diet that gives them a healthy life.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Really related to this, as you well know, one of the priorities of the government when it comes to this is stunting in children, and that is to a large extent related to diets. So the food, to be food insecure doesn't mean that you're starving. It just means that you don't have a fully nutritious diet.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a way of living then.
Well, either because you don't have the money, to let's say you grow your own rice and you have chickens, and then all you can eat is rice and chicken. That's not going to give you a balanced diet,
Right. Agree. Yeah.
But you're not starving. So that's what as I mentioned, part of the project, they gave them vegetable seeds and taught them how to grow vegetables, which people in this village were not all of them were aware of.
Yeah. Okay.
They again taught them about the importance of nutrition, but also they gave them running water, and they fixed the road so that they can get their produce. They mostly use what do you call caoutchouc, so to make rubber. Yeah, rubber raw material. That's what they sell. But if it takes you a day to get to the city where you can sell it, that means you are not so productive, because during that day you cannot do anything else. If the road is better and it only takes you 1 hour, and you can only also navigate the road when it's rainy season, then you are much better off. And with that extra time and extra income, you can buy better food. Yeah. So it's quite complex how to fix food insecurity. And like I said, in Sanggau Kabupaten, the local authorities took this study very seriously.
Yes.
And they used their findings to base the development efforts on.
Right. Moving on to the other subject, Miklos. A couple days ago, the whole world celebrated or commemorating the May Day for one day. How do you see, labor situation in Indonesia? Your perspective.
Major May Day demonstrations also near our office. Our office is very close to the National Monument,
Yes.
Monas.
I'm pretty sure that was a good view then. You have a clear view of what's our brother and sisters of labor in Jakarta specifically.
That's right. Well, also because you guys had a day off, but we in the UN we did not. So
we don't. We're still working also in May Day.
Media is the same, right? Media and the UN.
Right. Okay.
So one of the UN agencies, the International Labour Organization,
Yes.
Works with the government and also with trade unions to improve working conditions and to convene what they call tripartite dialogue. So government, workers, and companies, or associations of companies.
Yes.
And they have also run many successful projects improving the working conditions of people. Let me give you 2 examples.
Okay.
So one of them is in Sulawesi, where there are a lot of people who, work on fishing boats for months on end on the sea.
Okay.
And they had run projects together with the government to strengthen the government inspections of the labor conditions on these boats, how often people can come back to their families, and what kind of conditions under which they work in the sea. Okay. So that's one example. ILO also has a project in Kalimantan where they work on palm oil plantations, where they support workers on palm oil plantations, and again have negotiations between the companies that run these plantations and the workers who work there to improve the conditions of the worker. Another area of work for the ILO at sort of at the more policy level is to advise the government on the government's request, the Ministry of Manpower, on how to conduct, based on international best practice, these dialogues between workers, employers, and the government.
Okay, it's very interesting what you mentioned earlier in Sulawesi, being for our fishermen in Sulawesi, staying 1 month in the sea. How do you, what sort of projects that you guys support the fishermen in Sulawesi, staying, while on the other hand, they're staying 1 month in the sea. On the whole month, the family is waiting for their spouse on the sea. What sort of education or what sort of assistance that the UN in this case is ILO?
So look, I mean, fishing is that kind of business. Like, also, if you work on an oil rig somewhere in the middle of the ocean, you'll be gone for a long time.
Yes.
Right? But how long that time is, whether there's an agreement with you on how long you'll be gone for, and then you can really come back when you were told you can come back, what the conditions are like during the time you are at the work site are still important. One particular area of assistance that ILO is providing is to help capacitate the workers so that they can negotiate better for their own rights. And also, as I mentioned earlier, work with the government agency to strengthen the inspections, right? Because there are laws governing these things, but those laws have to be enforced and implemented. And so what the UN can bring, whether in this area or other areas, is best practice from other countries around the world. So what we call international best practices.
Okay.
And that's how we support Indonesia and how we support many other countries in a similar fashion.
Okay, so mostly then it's a capacity building toward workers in several areas, including Sulawesi and also Kalimantan with the palm oil plantation.
Yes, so there's capacity building. There's also capacity building not just of the workers, but also of the government agencies that are there in this case to enforce the labor conditions.
Right. So beside Sulawesi and Kalimantan, we also had a chance to talk with Said Iqbal. I'm pretty sure he also he also in the agency of ILO, and he mentioned about the modern slavery still happening for the past 25 years. So what do you think?
Well, so some of the things, I mean, modern slavery is rather strong of a term, but when I said that we need to improve working conditions, so when somebody's told they will come back from a fishing boat in 1 month or 2 months, whatever it is the agreement, then that agreement has to be fulfilled, right?
Right.
So, okay, we may call it modern slavery if it's not, but it's like basically about workers' rights. What the ILO talks about as decent jobs.
Okay. I hope it's not too exaggerated, though, the modern slavery terms, because that's what he said.
Right. So look, once you mention modern slavery, something else comes to mind that is a completely different area of work that perhaps, you and your listeners may be interested in. And that's to do with Indonesian migrant workers who are put into, modern slavery conditions in other countries.
In other countries, yeah, I agree. Right.
So there is an organization called IOM, the International Organization of Migration. It's also a UN agency, which first of all educates people not to fall to these recruitment scams that promise the world, but are kind of suspicious. And second, also works with the government to help workers who get into trouble abroad. Sometimes their passports are taken away, they have to work 20 hours a day.
Or even with the wrong visa, something like that.
Correct. Don't get paid. Get sexually harassed by their employers. Things like that. So IOM works with the government to help these people come back and reintegrate into their communities in Indonesia.
Great to hear that.
So you mentioned modern slavery, and that's what this made me think of.
Okay, great. Wow. It's a it's a great explanation so far. So moving on with the with the other supports of the UN in Indonesia. We already talked about the the labor, the ILO, and also the IFAT. Uh, Now we're moving on to the next agency, which is you mentioned last week. It's a most active most active involvement in Indonesia, which is UNICEF.
Yes. So UNICEF, I mean, it's one of the, UNICEF and UNDP, the UN Development Program. These two are the agencies with the biggest presence
Yes.
in Indonesia. Right? UNICEF is the UN's children's agency, and they work again with the government on various projects. One of them is to support the government's efforts to catch up with vaccination. Because during COVID, when everything was closed, and there was a lot of focus on COVID vaccines, perhaps, but in many areas of the country, they fell behind in routine childhood vaccinations. So UNICEF supported the government in, catching up for these childhood vaccinations. It's supported by, donating vaccines, but also by providing tools, logistical tools that help those health authorities, particularly on small islands or areas where it's difficult to get to,
Okay.
how you can deliver vaccines without them going bad by the time you get there, and you have to inject a little baby. There were also efforts, in some parts of Indonesia, in some communities, people
People are still not believing in vaccine.
correct. So people are misguided, right, into vaccines being harmful. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation about vaccines.
Yeah.
So UNICEF, for instance, on Madura Island, ran a project where it engaged community leaders, women community leaders, and women religious leaders who would speak up in community gatherings about vaccines.
Right.
So again, you mentioned the term capacity building earlier. A lot of our projects are about capacity building, but of course, the ultimate result is not the education. The ultimate result is whatever that education brings. In this case, higher vaccination rates.
Yes, and also knowing about what exactly vaccination is all about.
Right. Another area of work where UNICEF works on in some parts of the country is to provide programs to encourage children to go to school. Maybe everybody or I know goes to school who is a child, but there are many areas, again, mostly in rural parts of the country, where many children simply don't go to school. So UNICEF, again, in cooperation with the government, runs programs not just to encourage these children, but to also offer alternative ways of schooling, help offer alternative ways of schooling, because if a child is 10 years old and they have never been to a school, it would be very difficult for them from one day to the next to go to the normal school and integrate.
Yes, correct. I agree with that.
So there are these programs where, again, UNICEF mostly provides the know-how based on practices in other countries, and the implementation falls to the local authorities on increasing the school rates. I mean, ideally to 100% of children. So these are just, again, two areas where UNICEF works.
Okay, that's UNICEF and UNDP assisting also capacity building for children, which is resulted in the know-how that you said earlier. How about while we still found that in Indonesia there's still there's a gap between tradition and also modern. So there's still a lot of happening minor marriage. What do you think about that?
Yes, so child marriage. That's right.
Yeah.
So indeed, that is another area that's at least three UN agencies are working on. One is UNICEF, we already talked about. The other one is UNFPA, which is the UN's population fund, and the third one is UN Women, the agency created, to gender equality.
Yes. Okay.
So the projects on countering child marriage are again mostly education based, right?
Yeah.
To educate mothers,
Yes.
to educate girls about their rights, and well, also to educate men. So there are lots of projects and many success stories about how girls who were proposed to by usually older men
Yeah.
had resisted with support of their families and managed to stay in school and not to get married as children. This is again an area that's also that the government considers very important, and that's why it's an area that the UN also works in.
Yeah, because it's a very, very delicate situation without, not forgetting that this tradition has been done since like ages ago, while we know at the moment it's kind of like inhuman for the underage to be married as young.
That's right. You're totally right. So, everybody should be able to enjoy life and make their own decisions.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were traditions before. On Nias Island, they used to chop out each other's heads off, right? So just because it's a tradition, we don't have it anymore.
Yes.
So there are traditions that are sort of, not in line with the values of today. Whether you call it human rights or you call it caring for society, caring for every member of society, including, a vulnerable little girl who at the age of 12 is married off to a 40-year-old man. I wouldn't say, traditions, there's so many traditions that are great. I would not say that this is about tradition versus modernity, right? And
Yes.
so many things in our modern society that are not great.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
perhaps
Yeah.
I would not frame it in those terms, but that certainly in every age, whether now or in history or maybe also in the future, there are certain things that are good, other things that are perhaps less good, and are not considerate of poorer and vulnerable people. And children are vulnerable people, well, because they're children. They often cannot stand up for themselves.
Yeah.
And that should not be taken advantage of, whether in Indonesia, Europe, Africa, America, anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, why do we should preserve some tradition that really, really inhuman, if I may say?
Right. Yes. At
Okay.
the same time,
Yes.
there are many traditions, right, that we had that have been lost over the years that we would need to, revive.
Yeah. Agree. Revive.
All the use of single-use plastic in Indonesia and in many other countries, particularly in Asia, right?
Okay.
Your grandmother, my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother didn't live in Indonesia, but my grandmother also didn't use plastic to wrap things. Your grandmother perhaps used banana leaves, right? And now we all use plastic.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's a tradition that's been lost, and
Yes.
I hope we can revive.
Sure.
Just a few weeks ago, I was in Yogyakarta at an event organized by the Ministry of Tourism,
Okay.
where I met with people in what are called priority tourism destinations in Indonesia.
Okay.
One of the communities spoke about how they are doing eco-friendly meals, for instance, by not using any plastics, but instead using banana leaves and other things like that for packaging. So there are lots of good traditions.
So it's a
that we
local
should bring
wisdom
back.
then.
Absolutely, local wisdom. Ask your grandmother, right? I always say. Our grandmothers knew best because, they may have had less money, they may have had less resources, but that's why they had to be smarter than we are.
Agree. So speaking about plastic, what sort of this is regarding also with the environmental caring. What sort of project that being done or currently in progress with Indonesian government in terms of preserving environmentally friendly environment?
Yes. Let's start with plastics.
Right.
There is right now, perhaps you and your listeners are aware, a plastics treaty being negotiated by member states through the UN.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This will be finalized in Korea in November, but the sort of one round of negotiations just completed last week, earlier this week, and there are two areas that countries are negotiating. Three areas countries are negotiating on. One is to reduce the manufacturing of plastic, right? For countries to commit to manufacturing less plastic.
Okay.
Now, I must say, at this point, it does not look like there will be consensus on this, because
And
some countries,
there may be some.
particularly, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, and speaking of this, there may be some, businessman or businesswoman out there who happily produce plastic will,
That's right.
will disagree. What do you think about this?
That's right. This is why, some countries, Saudi Arabia and China are the most vocal, are against this. They say we need to continue to produce plastic. The problem is what happens to that plastic. Okay? So the second area that this treaty, that may be in the treaty is about how to reduce plastic waste, increase recycling, increase reuse, and also handle the waste in a more professional manner.
Okay.
So it does not end up in the ocean.
Yeah.
And then the third area of the treaty that they are negotiating is about, developed countries supporting developing countries so that they can actually pay for their own waste management.
Okay.
So what will be in the final treaty, we don't know.
Okay.
But this is one area, Indonesia, like all other UN member states, 193, are part of these negotiations. International treaties, every country has to sign up for. So, sometimes they are not as strong as some people and some countries want them to be. But at least there's international consensus, and then every country has to implement.
Right. So these 193 countries, I think maybe they could come up with what kind of plastic that really, really environmentally friendly, doesn't it?
Well, yes. I think it sounds to me like if you were at the negotiating table, you would be on the side of the country that want to reduce manufacturing.
It's not like, on the other side, we should care about employment as well, laboring as well. There are so many thousands of workers working on the plastic plantation or plastic plant. What happened to them? We need to care about them as well. Besides.
That is also a good point. Look, what I want to say about the treaty, look, whatever is in the treaty, each country can implement more, stronger measures, right? Indonesia or any other country can decide, okay, I still want to reduce the amount of plastic I make, even though it's not in the treaty. Now, about jobs, absolutely. So the UN also runs projects on what are called green jobs, right? To retrain people, to provide incentives for people, to move from, if we stick with this example, from plastic packaging to banana leaf packaging.
To banana leaf, yeah. Planting more banana trees then.
Right. So there are jobs. It's just the jobs are different. And there has to be, realization and retraining on that. And the project I mentioned to you earlier that I visited in Yogyakarta is actually a project by the Ministry of Tourism and again ILO, the labor organization, on green jobs in tourism. Yeah. So sort of, again, more environmentally friendly tourism initiatives. Indonesia is a beautiful country, but when the beach is full of plastic, tourists won't like it.
All right. So, moving on to the next one. You said earlier your visit to Jogja, seeing one of the Jogja's most tourism destination. In terms of tourism, how the UN supports Indonesia in tourism process? So
there are, again, several UN agencies working in this area. One of them is the project I mentioned with ILO, which works with the Ministry of Tourism on green jobs and what we call blue jobs. Okay. Blue jobs mean jobs related to the ocean, but a sustainable use of the ocean.
Okay.
So for instance, they work with universities and polytechnics to help villages learn about tourism. So, you get a homestay, perhaps the government helps you build a homestay, but then how do you market it? what kind of service tourists expect, whether they are Indonesian tourists or foreign tourists. Some of these people in some of these communities have never been a tourist in their life, so they don't know.
Okay.
And then UN, together with the Ministry of Tourism, works and local implementing partners works to build the capacity of these people, also how to write a business plan, how to think through what should be my price, how to do marketing, what kind of food to offer, how to run their little tourism business. Another area that I'd like to mention is by an agency we have not yet talked about, which is UNESCO, the Scientific and Cultural Organization of the UN. Indonesia has many World Heritage sites, and UNESCO runs projects with young people who live nearby these sites on how they can take advantage of the tourism opportunities that these sites bring. Because what we want, let's say, a tourist goes to Borobudur,
Yes.
they see the site, they go back to Yogyakarta right away, then the people in the Borobudur area don't benefit anything. Right? So how can entrepreneurs create products or build packages that will enable them to benefit from tourism? There are, for instance, UNESCO works with artists and people who work in creative industries, supporting them, basically funding some ideas on how to create, just beautiful bags or whatever these are that they can sell. So it's not like typically nowadays you go to a site, you have 200 vendors all basically selling the same thing, right? Which may have even been minor. But how local products that you can charge a higher price for, because the tourists will value it's not the same thing that everybody else has. So that's a project by UNESCO, like I said, working with young entrepreneurs in the areas around Indonesia's World Heritage Site. So these are two examples I wanted to mention when it comes to tourism.
Okay. In your own opinion, how do you see the tourism? How's your experience visiting Jogja, and also you said you were in Makassar. I hope you had a chance to visit several tourism destinations in several areas during your projects here in Indonesia. What do you think?
I think Indonesia is great, and
Personally,
I love going to all kinds of places, and I get to do it both for work and for fun. But when I go to a work, to a project site, and then they tell me, "Hey, come with us. We go hike up this mountain, and there'll be a beautiful view." Or, "Hey, let's just go to this beach after the meetings," and or they give me great food. I'm always amazed about the diversity and the beauty of Indonesia and the kindness of its people, particularly. Jakarta is okay too, but particularly outside Jakarta, Jakarta people are you go.
That doesn't sound really, really enthusiastic for Jakarta.
Jakarta is what it is. It's a big city.
Okay.
But Indonesia, so many people, everybody knows about Bali. I'm talking about foreigners, right?
Okay.
But Indonesia beyond Bali, so beautiful, so many things to see, so much culture to appreciate, great diverse food to eat.
But it's overexploited, I think. My own opinion.
What do you mean?
It's very packed right now in Bali, but there's also
Bali.
There's so many other Bali in Indonesia.
Absolutely, it's Indonesia beyond Bali. Yes.
Okay.
I speak to my friends on my own private social media. I post about all the great places I go to. I'm trying to do my own small part to promote Indonesia beyond Bali as a destination. My parents are now here visiting me.
Okay.
They are 80. My father is 80. My mother is 75. Next weekend, we are going on some historical train trip to Garut, from Bandung to Garut.
Okay, yeah.
I think we will be the only bule, it's mostly Indonesians, to look at the early days of Javanese train tourism.
There's also one thing there's also one museum for train museum if you would like to see. There's one in Ambarawa, Central Java. Java. Since Garut is on West Java, but to make your short, there's a tollway heading to Semarang. Then from Semarang you go to Ambarawa. It's another 40 minutes drive from there. It's a
Okay,
good
well,
one.
look, I'll try. I mean, Semarang is on my list of places to visit.
Okay, yeah.
I heard it was also a nice town. I must say, when I go visit cities like Semarang, I prefer taking the train as a more environmentally friendly travel and also super comfortable.
So
Um,
there are several places in your bucket list then.
Sorry?
There are several places in your bucket list then, visiting in Indonesia, beyond
Yes,
Bali.
yes, absolutely.
Right. It has been very interesting. So we have been talk about how UN supports in Indonesia in various many projects, starting from child projects, labor projects, tourism projects, food and agriculture. Now it's for the last minutes. How about Indonesia's role in supporting UN projects? Domestic and also international.
Right. So domestically, of course, all these projects we talked about are done in cooperation with the government.
Yes.
So let's perhaps talk about how Indonesia supports the UN elsewhere, right?
Yes, elsewhere,
Not in
out there.
Indonesia. There are two areas I would like to mention.
Okay.
So Indonesia, particularly under President Jokowi, has been, quite internationally minded and internationally focused. Indonesia sits on the boards of many UN agencies, as it wants to play a more active role in influencing the decision making at these organizations. A few years ago, Indonesia was also a member of the Security Council for a term. So that's really one part where Indonesia helps the multilateral system to function by taking, an active role in its governance. Not every country wants to do this, and it reinforces this rule-based multilateral system that was created after the Second World War to make sure that we have a world that avoids, major wars. And while there are wars, and there have been wars, there are wars now, at least we have avoided world wars. Another area in which Indonesia supports the UN is in peacekeeping.
Peacekeeping, yeah, okay.
Indonesia is one of the largest peacekeeping contributing countries. Right now, it's at seventh or eighth. It changes all the time. Several thousand Indonesian soldiers and police officers work mostly in Africa,
Yeah.
in areas to keep and maintain peace. And the UN is very thankful for that. Last year, I don't know if you know this or your listeners have heard this, but for instance, the UN Policewoman of the Year was an Indonesian policewoman
Okay.
who works in the Central African Republic. Those of you who are interested, on the YouTube channel of UN Indonesia, you can watch an interview with her,
Okay.
explaining her work and why she got this award.
So she was being awarded as the UN Women.
She was being awarded as the UN peacekeeper, no, UN peacekeeping police officer of the year. There's one every year.
Okay.
And she was selected for 2023. And
Right.
the UN Secretary General himself gave her the award.
Nice to hear
So
that.
it's a big deal.
Very big deal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm pretty sure it will not take minutes to explain how Indonesia's support UN elsewhere outside Indonesia. But last question, Pak Miklos, as we all know that Indonesian government right now is relocating its capital city to IKN, where we are right now. How about the UN? How is UN's response to this? Will the UN agency be moved to East Kalimantan as well, or staying in Jakarta to maintaining its projects with the Indonesian government?
Yes. So well, first of all, the UN, the OIKN has requested support from several UN agencies in different areas related to the development of IKN.
Okay.
There was an agreement signed. There are discussions ongoing about the implementation of these projects.
Okay.
There is one that is already being implemented, which is what's called a voluntary review of the IKN area, and so basically evaluating it in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goal.
Okay.
because IKN wants to make sure that IKN is going to remain, going to be a sustainable city in
Sustainable
many ways.
forest, yes, sustainable forest
Right.
city, yeah.
Exactly. So that's why they want to draw a baseline where we are now and make sure that they are going to, improve on that, further improve on that as time goes on. So they are working with SCAP, which is a UN agency.
SCAP.
SCAP that's based in Bangkok.
Okay.
It works in all over Asia on economic development issues.
Okay.
And they are also working with us, with the resident coordinator's office in Jakarta on this. And there are, and as I said, there are also other projects sort of ongoing. In terms of relocating of the UN, so there is a schedule, for diplomatic missions, and we are a diplomatic mission.
Yes.
To be over time relocating to IKN.
To IKN, yeah.
Now, the UN is anyway today not only in Jakarta. We have offices I visited offices in Makassar.
Yeah.
There are offices in Lombok. These are project offices. So it's not like all the UN staff is in Jakarta. It's a need-based system. But yes, there's an expectation that sort of the heads of agencies, the main administrative office of the UN, like other diplomatic missions, will also move to IKN once the bulk of the government has moved. So not now is the first or second wave, but over time.
Okay. Right. Wow. Thank you so much, Miklos Gaspar, as the Director of United Nations Information Center Indonesia in Jakarta. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time with us.
Thank you very much, Pak Abi, for your interest, and I hope your listeners found this interesting and valuable, and I'm happy to come back and discuss other topics.
Very
or
much.
have some of your experts, particularly once we start working on IKN, describe those projects.
All right. So we'll be waiting for you then, speaking live in our studio here in IKN.
Thank you, Pak Abi.
Thank you, Pak Miklos. Have a good weekend and say hi, salam hormat, salam Nusantara for all staffs in UNIC.
Thank you. I do that. Have a good weekend to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Right, listener, that's our conversation with Miklos Gaspar, Director of United Nations Information Center Indonesia in Jakarta. Back again with our IKN hari ini on 98.3 FM RRI IKN.
Senang pejalan kaki itu silahkan pindah ke ibu kota baru. Yang senang bersepeda juga, yang ingin sehat itu juga pindahlah ke ibu kota baru. Kalau yang senang naik mobil, apalagi mobilnya pakai BBM fosil, jangan pindah ke ibu kota baru. Dan konsep besarnya adalah Smart Forest City.
Ajakan Presiden Republik Indonesia Joko Widodo kepada masyarakat Indonesia yang senang berjalan kaki dan naik sepeda dan larangan bagi yang hobi menggunakan bahan bakar fosil untuk pindah ke IKN menegaskan bahwa IKN yang diinginkan oleh Presiden Jokowi mengedepankan konsep Smart Forest City. Menyikapi hal itu, Menteri PUPR Basuki Hadi Mulyono menegaskan dalam acara Beranda Nusantara RRI bahwa dalam pembangunan IKN hanya 20% saja yang berupa bangunan, sementara 70% akan berupa ruang hijau.
70% harus hijau, 20-30% itulah yang hanya bangunan. Jadi itu semua akan menjadi memang kota baru yang mempunyai seperti yang disampaikan oleh Pak Presiden tadi.
Prinsip dasar pembangunan IKN yang memadukan konsep Forest City dan Smart City akan membuat IKN menjadi kota cerdas dan modern berkelanjutan serta berwawasan lingkungan. Pakar Tata Kota Universitas Trisakti Jakarta, Dr. Yayat Supriyatna menyatakan bahwa IKN dengan konsep Smart Forest City sudah dibuat dalam Urban Design Development sehingga akan menjadi panduan dalam menentukan indikator capaian konsep Smart City with the Forest City di IKN.
Smart City atau Smart Forest yang dikembang itu kan sebuah konsep yang harus masuk dalam skenario perencanaan pembangunan kotanya, dan itu sudah dibuat dalam konsep tata ruang, RT RW dan RDTR-nya, bahkan sudah sudah masuk ke UDD-nya, Urban Design Development-nya. Ini akan menjadi panduan karena di dalam konteks konsep itu sudah akan ditetapkan indikator-indikator pencapaian yang akan dicapai di sana.
Yayat juga menegaskan penggunaan energi yang efektif dan efisien, klimatisasi, dan juga desain tata ruang serta ruang terbuka hijau sudah ditentukan. Menurut Yayat, sejauh ini penerapan konsep yang diinginkan dari IKN dengan Smart City with the Forest City masih on the track. Dan di tingkat otorita pun, konsep itu sudah dipahami dan bukan hanya wacana, khususnya di kawasan inti kota IKN.
Kalau dari gagasan konsep rencana sih masih on the track ya, karena bagaimanapun di tingkat otorita pun sepengetahuan saya sudah semuanya disepakati. Dan itu juga harus dipahami oleh setiap siapapun yang menjadi investor atau si pelaksana dari kegiatan itu. Karena bagaimanapun kita berharap bahwa kegiatan-kegiatan perencanaan itu bisa memaksimalkan semua gagasan itu bisa dijalankan. Jadi tidak hanya sebatas wacana. Dan ini sudah terencana pada setiap lokasinya gitu. Jadi khususnya di kawasan inti kota.
Namun menjaga konsep Smart City with the Forest City di IKN Nusantara bukan tanpa tantangan. Menurut anggota Komisi 4 DPR RI Firman Subagio, konsistensi dalam pelaksanaan konsep Smart City with the Forest City harus dijaga dan harus masuk dalam perencanaan pembangunan jangka menengah dan jangka panjang pemerintah. Lebih jauh, Firman menegaskan agar IKN menjadi kota administratif agar tidak terjadi dualisme kepemimpinan dan konsep Smart Forest City akan tetap bisa dijalankan dan mengacu pada Undang-Undang IKN.
RPJPN harus lebih fokus kepada Ibu Kota Nusantara itu konsep ke depan seperti apa yang pada dasar undang-undangnya adalah Undang-Undang IKN, yaitu harus menjadi kota administratif supaya tidak ada dualisme kepemimpinan di sana. Akan mengganggu sangat. Kalau untuk rencana kerjanya itu penjabarannya adalah mengikuti RPJPN 2025-2045. Di situ diarahkan bahwa itu akan menjadi Smart City and Forest City.
Konsep Smart City with the Forest City menurut Firman Subagio sudah saatnya diterapkan di IKN yang berlokasi di Pulau Kalimantan. Menurutnya, hutan Kalimantan sudah banyak penggundulan dan konsep yang sama juga pernah diterapkan di Brasil. Walaupun memakan waktu lama, tapi menurutnya harus dimulai.
Saya rasa di Kalimantan ada waktunya karena di sana itu hutannya sudah sangat gundul dan itu ada referensi, ada contoh seperti di Brasilia. Di Brasilia juga seperti itu, tapi memang makan waktu yang lama, tapi harus dimulai.
IKN Nusantara akan menjadi representasi bangsa yang unggul dengan mewujudkan Smart City dan berwawasan lingkungan serta memiliki standar internasional sehingga akan menjadi contoh bagi pembangunan kota-kota lain di Indonesia. Untuk konsep Smart City, Forest City bukanlah isapan jempol belaka, namun hadirnya IKN menjadikan hal itu sebagai realita di depan mata.